but you're seeing the right view, right? You've got the full screen. You haven't got the presenter view yet. Good. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our session on how to build a highly engaged workplace by optimizing your employee communications. First things first, I'm Philip Nunn. I'm General Manager of Business at SnapComms, which is now part of Everbridge. And if you're not familiar with us, SnapComms is a pretty unique communications platform that helps organizations right across the globe, first of all, reach their employees, but secondly, engage their employees much more effectively. And I'm really pleased to say that today I'm joined by Dan Pryor. Dan is Senior Communications Director at Comcast. Dan has headed up the internal comms team there for 8 years and is responsible for strategy and execution of messaging to the company's, I think, 80,000 employees. So hi, Dan.
Good to be here and looking forward to discussion.
Perfect, thank you. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we begin. Deck is available for those that want a copy. We're probably going to run for about 15 minutes, and after which I think there'll be some time for some Q&A at the end. So let's get into it. I guess as we've all seen, really, the world's gone through a pretty large period of change in the last couple of years. We've kind of all been forced to adapt to this new norm as fast and as best we could. Prior to 2020, I think most of us were all kind of beavering away in our busy corporate offices as usual. And everyone suddenly was uprooted and working remotely from a home office, I guess if we were lucky and set up to do so. More frequently, I've seen dining rooms, bedrooms, kitchen counters, basically whatever works. But as we come to the end of 2021, this situation's changing again. So hybrid workplaces are either the norm or they're going to be the norm. And we've got decentralized teams, and this can bring a tendency to become, increasingly disconnected. And to a certain extent, digital channels have replaced some of that face-to-face interaction, but they're not always totally successful. But what we can say is that the way we work is continuing to change, and that's a real challenge for our employees. And one of those challenges is that the traditional ways in which we communicate are likely not going to cut it in this new norm. So in the past, staff have kind of tended to be flooded with messages through a single channel. And that means both urgent and non-urgent messages really blending together. And every message is competing for your employees' attention. And it's really pretty much impossible for staff to read all these messages, but while also doing their job effectively. There's just too many. And so that's why they only pay attention to those messages that they know that are useful and relevant to them. So they start to self-select those out. And we all know that 50% of internal communications are not read. So if your communications happen to be in that 50%, that's Towers Watson study, your efforts are just wasted. Messages don't get through. The effectiveness of the overall communications channel is diluted, and we start to see business performance suffer. So now is absolutely the right time for a new approach. And it's all about sending the right message to the right audience in the right way in order to achieve optimum results. And this problem really drives the philosophy behind what we call our communication spectrum framework. So it takes the messages that we need to send and then considers the characteristics of each channel in order to understand which method of communication is appropriate for each. So as a result, the messages that you need to send are then matched with the channel that's most optimized for success. And it's a really kind of powerful, practical approach to communications that helps to align business objectives with communication outputs. And so, busy slide here, but you can see in the image, I guess, a number of reasons why we communicate with employees. So in this spectrum, we've grouped these communication types left to right into categories ranging from kind of life safety or critical communications through to operational, so priority or important communications, to more connection style of messaging. So, for example, engaging and social style communications. And we can start to add a time objective to the category. So, for example, critical messaging that needs to be read immediately. Life safety use cases such as, active shooter, weather events, fire in the building, and so on. And then as you move across the scale, we can see messaging that's now crucial for business operation, messaging that I should read at some point today. So policy changes, compliance communications, etc., so on. But by plotting your communications like this, you can start to see, which communications are mission critical, for example, those that really do need to be intrusive and interrupt staff versus, kind of good to know messaging that should be less intrusive and not interrupt staff, that they can start to interact with that as they need to. So we're starting to tailor our communications based on the desired outcome of the message. And we can start to utilize tools that really facilitate that. So remember, we're talking about the right message delivered at the right time and in the right way. So let's try and bring this to life with some example messaging for some specific use cases at every stage that we can see along this spectrum. So first up, here's an example of some critical messaging. So a full screen desktop alert signifying something someone needs to read immediately. It's a matter of life and death. And in this case, it's a fire in the building. So this is something that needs to interrupt, it needs to be intrusive, etc. Next, a priority message. There's an unplanned system outage, which staff need to be made aware of. Now, it's not as important as the prior message, so it doesn't need to be as intrusive, but it's still something that has to be seen by staff. Third, here's an example of an important message. So again, we're coming across that communication spectrum. This one is a new compliance policy, for example. It's been created. Staff need to accept that they've read it and they're going to comply with that policy. And then here's an example of leadership messaging. So in this case, it's delivered by a pop-up video alert, which staff can choose when to interact and then consume this message. It doesn't fill the screen. It doesn't interrupt the worker. And of course, but this message can be set to recur until that content has actually been consumed. So you start to get some really good readership rates. And moving along the spectrum again, now we've got a staff survey, and staff can interact with this when appropriate to them. But importantly, because we do want this to be completed, it's not going to drop to the bottom of your inbox. It will represent itself at a time that is set by the message sender. So we're using messaging channels that are appropriate to the message that's being sent and the communications outcome that we're trying to drive. And lastly, this is an example of an awareness campaign. It's not critical for staff to read this. However, you can use passive messaging, such as screensavers and so on, lock screens, for example, can be used to advertise all sorts of things, whether they be social events, employee celebrations, rewards, recognition. In this case, we use an example to highlight that it's Mental Awareness Week, for example. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll now hand across to Dan to talk a bit more about Comcast Communicate. So over to you, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Philip, and thank you for having me today. So I've been with Comcast here 6+ years, and we've had SnapComms in there. And then actually my previous job at a large retailer, we use SnapComms as well. I think one of the unique things around the Comcast piece is, we've got, about an 80,000 person staff out there, but it's a very diverse in the way that we, as we go to market for each segment of our population. And Phil, if you want to go to the next slide, some of the challenges pieces that we're seeing there, largely dispersed. So we have technicians and network engineers that are actually literally out in the field. A tablet or an iPhone is the only way that they're reaching them. We have call centers with hundreds of people, which are actually now virtual call centers. So now it's even, been spread out further. And then, of course, we have our traditional office workers that are in the workers and in a virtual world today as well as retail stores, where you may come in and either pick up your equipment as a self-service piece or look at mobile phones. So really diverse communication needs, very different group of segments that we look at. And so we have SnapComms in our kind of back pocket as a digital tools, as we look at digital tools and the way that we go to market each of those segments. And that would kind of take you through, some examples of how within Comcast we would try to use kind of the different solutions that they come with. And there's 3 tools. If you want to go to the next slide there, Philip, we subscribe to from SnapComms. One is the alerts, one is a ticker, and the other is the screensavers. So when we take a look at alerts, all of us have to typically get certain things out that may be, high priority or need all employees to really make sure that they're interacting and connecting with. And the way that we did this before SnapComms is we would typically blanket people with email, right? And so there'd be an email campaign that would start on this date, and as we got towards the due date for that mandatory, compliance with whatever the communication piece was, we would kind of keep blanketing until we got everybody either signed up, or maybe it's, their mandatory training for the year on integrity type training. And alerts really allowed us to kind of push alerts out to get people notified, allow them with that pop-up piece to be able to kind of either say, hey, I'm going to deal with this now, I want to take a look at it and go, or say, remind me later. And then the pop-up would come up a little bit later. This was really great for our compliance components, because instead of having to blanket everybody with that email over and over again, because we didn't necessarily know who or who hadn't done it yet, on the back end, we can tie in the alerts so that, and like I'm sure, like most companies, very quickly we get 80% of the people to do what they needed to do. Click on this link, go do this, whatever we're looking to do. But finalizing that last 20% and really that last 2 to 5% is really where we utilize this, because on the back end, SnapComms, essentially we can do a resend, but we'll only do a resend to those that haven't already interacted with that alert. And so it just, instead of doing it again to 100% of the people, we go to, the 20, and then, it's a 10 and then a 5 that will kind of do some of those pieces as we get closer. And it takes some of the noise out of the system, getting it out of email. And I think the alert piece is the important one in that, most of the tools that we have out there, we are kind of on demand and asking employees to come pull information. Alerts are the one tool that we have that, like email, and then fortunately that's what sometimes we're using email as alerting, because it's a push mechanism. The alerts give us another tool to do the push, but we're very strict around when we use alerts and how we use alerts, so that it doesn't clutter up the noise like the rest of the email. So it's typically, if we need an employee to take action on something, we are using an alert within Comcast to make sure that we're pushing that piece and trying to get that action done, and typically in a compliance. The second piece that you see there is on the tickers. And so this is it for our call center employees. And you think about our call center employees, they are on a computer, they're on a phone, talking to our customers. And that computer screen, they really need to kind of have the main system that they're interacting. If they need to authorize, video channels, or be able to check a modem, or, do some of the troubleshooting pieces, they need that main screen up the whole time. So we didn't necessarily want to use an alert to kind of pull them away to something different. In that case, we use a ticker. So for example, in our repair COEs, we'll use the ticker to kind of make sure that those agents know that, for example, there's an outage in the San Francisco area because somebody was digging and took out a fiber line. We can have that ticker kind of jump up and make sure that they're notified, and it doesn't take over the screen that they are they're looking at and interacting with, but they can still get that visual cue for that. And then on the screensavers, the big piece there, we look at screensavers. We have, in our main corporate buildings, which are not as occupied obviously today as they were during the pandemic, although we're getting close to coming back. We had a couple hundred screensavers, and this is that kind of branding, things that we want to kind of keep people informed of. But with the screensaver piece, we were able to kind of really start pushing information to all employees and go from 200 screens to 80,000 screens with those screensaver pieces, to be able to kind of just slowly remind people about cultural pieces, important dates, things coming up. The screensavers really have helped us kind of just get some of that general information and pull it out of email, and actually then push people through the screensavers because they're interactive. You can actually click on links to jump them over to our intranet and other locations for more deeper information if they need that. So if we can go to the next slide, just talk about some of the solutions. Proactive messaging, we kind of talked a little bit about that instead of kind of the pull notifications. And then the 80,000 digital display screens, you know, it instantly made all the media components that we build and deliver, both for TV, for our website, for those digital signs, we're able to very easily replicate and push those different pieces out. Yeah, other thing I'd say with SnapComms, you know, for those of you that have kind of implemented a new intranet or some of the other tools, we were able to get the service up and running and pushed out literally in 2 weeks. And I think that's one thing that really differentiates SnapComms from a lot of other people out there. The speed at which you can actually get it up and running, especially with it's in the cloud. You got to kind of do your connectors with your Active Directory, and you know, we have it actually our Active Directory in Azure services, so that connection was pretty quick and easy. But it really trying to do that quickly and get the whole server infrastructure up and going with it was great. Being able to bypass IT, so like screensavers, for example, we used to be pushing our screensavers out through our IT organization. They would actually go and actually push a package to everybody's PC or Mac, whichever piece you're on. And they wanted to deburden themselves of that because we were doing a push every week to all of those different employees. And it was really tough to differentiate, okay, now we only want to send it to maybe the Northeast because it's a special promotion that's only happened in the Northeast versus California or the West Coast. The detail of targeting that we're allowed to do, even with the screensavers to specific groups, we have an example of some screensaver pieces, you know, rewards and recognition. We've done rewards and recognition just for our finance employees, and just our finance employees in our Seattle area, and get very specific. So it's very easy to kind of tie that up, and it's amazing when they see their name kind of come up on that screensaver, the kind of interactive piece of it, and it's up there for a couple weeks. It does a lot for engagement as well. And we started small. We started in California with about 5,000 employees, moved it pretty quickly after a test of about 3 or 4 months into our West Division, about 22,000 employees. And just as of this last year, we've now consolidated and have all of the organization in an enterprise standpoint on SnapComms across the enterprise, which has really made getting certain piece of comms out there much easier. And you know, the results, and we talked to the results of these of what we've done with SnapComms on the next slide. Put that, you know, I've talked about reducing the email burden. You know, again, for some of these compliance things, we were pushing more emails to try to get to that 100% compliance on. You know, some of it is integrity training, some of it had to do with, you know, different events or different pieces that we needed 100% people there. It's really improved from our employee surveys, and you know, we do two annual surveys of our employees, as well as we are on the NPS system. So we do every 2 months we do an eNPS. We've seen our communication scores actually really rise with the digital tools that we have out there. So we've really been able to see that people are getting the information they need to do their jobs. We've seen greater workplace engagement. You know, that's probably more of a global piece of things that we're doing, but on our engagement scores, for example, in overall within the organization, we have a positive sentiment from employees on both comms and the engagement scores of over 84%. So a huge piece that's really driving you know, both the culture, but the tools that we're using to get there. And then stronger overall communication effectiveness. In the West Division here in Comcast, we actually have a business strategy piece that's based on the letters WEST. And then all of those strategies tie into each of those. And we survey 4 times a year random groups to make sure that people understand the business strategy. And we've kind of found that our business strategy piece is adopted at about 82% of employees. So we're seeing great feedback from that, seeing that it's working really well, and been very happy with the SnapComms as a digital tool to add into our quiver besides email, social, and our intranet. And I think that wraps things up.
That is great. Dan, thank you so much. Philip, thank you for sharing your story. I see a bunch of good dialogue and questions being asked and answered here in the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to follow up. I think it's fair to say with either Philip or Dan, if you have to dive into to anything that was just covered. We're going to keep things moving. We have one more presentation. We want to make sure we have